Kia ora koutou. Welcome back to this briefing, looking at our annual plan and some of the work we've got to do to complete that. So I'll hand over to you, Giles. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is one of a series of workshops and briefings that we're holding in preparation for the annual plan. We wanted to highlight and give visibility of a number of other potential changes to the ones we've already talked about, to get some guidance from Council about whether you want us to do any further work on them to progress as part of the annual plan process, and to highlight some potential impacts on rates based on the calculations we've done, which clearly are indicative only at this point in time. So obviously year two, which is 25-26, our priorities covers the three core services, as we've talked about a number of times, and obviously beginning to give life to the outcome measures and service measures that were agreed through the LTP process. Making sure that the Regional Delivery Committee is working effectively to provide that level of assurance, and the rate increase that was agreed is 15.5% in the LTP. We obviously also need to continue to realise those internal efficiencies and savings, and we also need to acknowledge, as we've talked about already and will continue to talk about over the coming weeks, the impact of the NLTF decisions, the National Land Transport Fund, the impact on PT services and what Council wants to do about those, but those will be covered in a separate briefing. What is behind the 15.5%? We thought it would be useful just to give Council as a reminder of what was driving that 15.5% was obviously MRT. There was a chunk of money from memory, 1.8 million. PT futures, the fact that we now will have to pay road user charges on EVs, and obviously we had allowed for 5% inflation in relation to bus contracts and total mobility. The important thing to note there is that NZTA's assumption is 3%, and so we may be able to adjust down for that, recognising that it is merely an assumption and the reality will be different from a number we assume. Also increasing in terms of plan development, so that's the natural capital contribution that we've talked about in terms of amortising that over 10 years, but that continues to have an impact. And then obviously degree of inflation across the board, reserve replenishment, following some of the large capital works, and in particular highlighting that stock banks don't depreciate because they don't wear out, we hope. And then some changes around low income assistance, etc., because we've been using reserves in the current year. So that was behind the 15.5%, and clearly once the plan's signed off, things change on a daily basis. So the starting point was 15.5%. There is a potential decrease given that PT service changes were not funded through the NLTF, and there is also a decision that Council will make in terms of the fare level, although we don't believe that that will be material in terms of the overall financial position and rates position of Council, but it's worth mentioning. And then obviously the items we particularly want to talk to you about today and get some guidance is any other changes which would inevitably lead to increases in rates going forward. So the things we would like to discuss and get some advice on is listed on the slide, and we've tried to give you an indication of the cost in 25-26 and therefore the rate increase, and our advice on the items that we've identified in terms of a trial of a Waimakariri district-wide river rate, which is the same approach as currently being trialled in Selwyn this year. Staff guidance is that we should include that for future LTP. The establishment of a Kaikoura Regional Park, which has also been talked about, which whilst the amount is signalled for establishing it, we need to recognise that there would be ongoing operating costs and also ongoing development as we looked to enhance the functions and opportunities that existed there. But for the establishment of it, we are also recommending, or our guidance is to include that for consideration in a future LTP. Service improvements in PT outside of PT futures. We will be bringing and having further conversations with council, but our staff guidance is no, given that there is no FAR contribution from NZTA. And then a couple of areas that we just wanted to highlight is we have a number of commercial opportunities that we have talked about a number of times. Those will continue to occur. As a council, we don't currently have any explicit funding available to explore those or staff resource, so we don't have capacity and capability. So as an indicative amount, we've indicated potentially 1.5 million as a starter for 10, which is 2 or 3 FTE plus some money to do appropriate professional contracts, etc., to do the work that will be needed to do to explore those. And then we also know that the land strategy will be coming back to council before Christmas, and if there is to be any significant implementation of that, it's likely to involve purchase of strategic pieces of land as the opportunity arises, and obviously that is not currently provided for, so we have put an indicative amount in of suggesting that a portion be included in the capital programme, which we believe would be about 0.8% rates for about a pot of about $20 million to start with, and that's something we'd like to get some guidance on as well. So the questions we'd like for you to discuss and get some guidance on are on the slide. Should we be including any of these for the 25-26 annual plan so that we can go away and do the relevant work? And if they are to be included, if these changes can be incorporated within the 15.5% rate rise that's been agreed, are councillors comfortable that we proceed on that basis? I have colleagues who can answer detailed questions on some of those, as I feel a little bit exposed here.
Hey, thanks, Joel. So, look, we've got about half an hour for this session now. You're just happy to take questions and comments from the floor. So the way I'd like to do it is that everyone gets a chance to have something to say. I know Ian's keen to go straight away. So happy for you to make a comment on those questions that are on the screen. I'll take some notes. I'm sure others will as well. And then if you've got any questions, just ask them as part of that as well. Thank you, Ian.
So I was just going to talk about the WIMAC targeted river rate. Stephen asked me to just do a bit of homework on the appetite for that from the WIMAC district. So I've talked to a few people up there, including Mayor Dan Gordon, and I've also talked to Stephen about it since then. And I think, and Lee's here, so she could confirm it. But Dan said they were quite keen on the concept, but they'd like to explore it before anything was done. And talking to Stephen, that exploration is probably, but he has enough funds to do the initial discussions. So that's why I think the recommendation is for it to go into the LTP rather than the annual plan, because he thinks he's got enough funds to actually do the initial work, which we'd need to do in terms of preparing for a formal proposal. And the initial work involves not only having meetings with Mayor Dan Gordon and some of his council and maybe some other players in the WIMAC district to gauge their views, although on the face of it they're enthusiastic, but it also gives our team, Lee's team, an opportunity to perhaps draw up some sort of blueprint as to what it is we're proposing might be encompassing for that discussion with the WIMAC. And those things, as I understand from Steve, are already covered, and he has enough funds to do that and enough staff resources to do that, in which case we don't need to include anything for expenditure in the annual plan at this stage.
Oh, thanks, Ian. I've got Claire and Vicky, and then keep putting your hands up after that. Yep. Got Grant and Jan, yep.
Yeah, thanks very much. I agree with the sentiment that Ian's just said around the Waimakariri district targeted river rate. I know there is a keenness to get something for the Ashley River, and also from conversations I know when Lee and I were at WDC, it's around looking at the bigger picture for the district as in the drainage aspects. And I know they've done quite a bit of work thinking about that, and they pulled that off their long-term plan that they've just done, just gone through. So I think I agree, have that as a bigger discussion. And I would also like to see that coincided with the completion of the Ashley scheme review, and possibility how we could actually make that fairer targeting. As far as the regional park goes, I think I just sit here and I remember we had a very strong submission from Roy Myers, I think it was, from around the Waipa River Regional Park. So there is an interest there as well. And so perhaps there's some benefits if we can keep this to a long-term plan discussion and perhaps look at some other options. And I'm sure could be other parts of Canterbury that might come to the fore there as well. With regard to commercial opportunities and strategic purposes, I think that if we've got good business cases come to us, I don't have any difficulty with us using our balance sheet there at the time. I would hopefully we'll get some more idea before the annual plan is finally drafted to find out what those commercial opportunities might look like. But as for strategic land purposes, I think we could definitely use a balance sheet there. The question I'd have is, would we normally, as a strategic land purchase, I mean, I guess that would require some consultation. Therefore, are we planning to go out with this annual plan for consultation, or do we do it in a fuller picture when and if the time comes?
Just the thinking behind was that we've had a couple over the last year, 18 months, where we have exercised the right to buy pieces of land, and at that we haven't set any funding aside for that specifically, and so we were trying to be proactive and go, we anticipate that there are likely to be opportunities, but clearly those options will be brought at the time. It's more about signalling the intent.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So I guess perhaps for me then that's more around a policy decision that's made at the table that we can give you some delegation or whatever it might look like, rather than setting a fund aside where you're actually borrowing some money effectively and paying some interest to grow a fund when you may or may not need it. And we know that we've got a balance sheet that should we need to touch it, we can. I guess for me, the one that's really concerning is the comment around the potential changes. And my sense is that there'll be a reduction in the rates increase from what we've currently figured from the PT perspective. And that will largely fall on one sector of our community. And so I'm thinking that possibly, given how the rates panned out this year, that everybody outside PT will be still looking at 15.5% or near enough, less a little bit of an adjustment for inflation rate. I'm not very comfortable us going out or sitting at this table thinking that that's our envelope, because I think that we have an opportunity to do two things. And one is to actually reduce the rates, which would align with our direction from central government. And the other thing is that we do also have the option, if there is an appetite for the council table, to take on board the comments that have been made at the top table around the risks around our natural capita borrowing. And maybe if there is, this might be a time when we could say, well, actually, we'll pay off 2 or 3 mil or 4 mil or whatever it might be. So just looking at that as an option going forward.
Thanks, Claire. Vicky, Grant and Yayan, the next.
Ian really asked or filled in what I was going to ask, which is, could I have a bit more information about what the recommendation to push back on the time for Waimakariri rather than doing it more immediately? If Waimakariri wanted to do it and the people wanted it, why would we say no? And that really goes to the thing that I say every year, which is, I know we have a thing about average rates, but actually what are we doing with the rates and where is it going to? And do those people want to pay them for the service they're going to get from it? So I really ask councillors to keep that in mind, as I ask every year, and every year we get fixated on average. But anyway, I'll keep asking it every time while I'm still at this table. So good to hear that. And you know, maybe that's something just to, you know, if Ian's got it on the, spoke to that, and it sounds clear cut. Let's leave that one to the LTP. Similarly, I suppose with the Kaikoura Regional Park, is there an urgency? Is there something that in establishing that provides a particular opportunity or something specific that's really needed, required, wanted? Then, I would hate to think we said, oh no, we won't at this point, and it's just around conversation and averages. And the other bits, a strategic fund for land purchases, we do have a balance sheet that can borrow as and when we need to. But one thing with that, we had a conversation, I haven't really had raised it so much at the table yet, but I have spoken to sort of solar rooftop rollout. And so we actually met, Craig and I and Giles, and also Tony Moore from City Council spoke on Monday with Rewiring Aotearoa, who are looking at both rural and urban rooftop solar opportunities and how we might facilitate a rolling out. New Zealand has about 2% of the rooftops with solar, compared with like Australia, 35%. Makes a massive difference in terms of, if you look at the costs that people are spending into the energy companies, and we could instead have people with, direct power and be supporting the city and be supporting our rural businesses in terms of shifting costs. And so there was a conversation there around, actually, is there a mechanism to facilitate? Now, at the point that sounds like there is an opportunity for a council to facilitate and to actually bring in private funding through some of those mechanisms. And so I would like to think we could keep that in the mix as a possible, and I see where that might sit in terms of, rather than a strategic land purchase, maybe this is something that, we might, if we need to put something into the rates to facilitate, say, a contestable fund for public buildings or community buildings, and it ties in with CDM and resilience, that, there's some opportunities in there where we can help deliver service benefits for our community and so on. And I would like to think we could do that. And there's an urgency in that. Like, we really need to be helping, I think, get on with some of those things, and we're in a great position to do it. But we can.
Thanks, Vic.
Chair.
Yep.
So I think that's one of the reasons we think that around that commercial opportunity. I mean, we use commercial in the kind of broadest sense of things that are actually have an investment and a commercial type arrangement that needs to be put in place that we currently don't have the capacity or the capability as an organisation to explore. And I would include the rewiring as part of that in terms of the things that we might explore. There are a number of them. I think, just to clarify, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but the reason for the provision of the strategic land purchases being, we were asking for guidance on, is at the moment you approve a capital programme each year, which we can then, as long as it's approved in the capital programme, staff can then invest. If it's not in the capital programme and hasn't been approved, we need to come back to council for a decision. So it's more about facilitating that kind of policy delegation framework and having those funds available, recognising that council would clearly be informed that these things were in, but we would know we would have that fund available to invest to support the land strategy as and when it is approved by council.
Okay, thanks, Giles. It's interesting to hear on the Waimakariri District river rating, and it's good that Ian's had a conversation with the Mayor about that, because I know that they have for some time been interested in that. But if that whole issue is kind of developed by staff without additional costs over the next little while, but again, putting it to the people as well, I'm sure the District Council and the Mayor would want to do that anyway, but it gives them time to sort of liaise with us and make sure that they've got all their ducks in a row as well. So that's okay, although I didn't really mind it being included, but if it needs more time, then that's fine. In terms of the Kaikoura Regional Park, we have been working with the District Council on and the Zone Committee, enthusiastic about the idea of a regional park and investigating that process. And that investigation is already underway with Stephen's team preparing a a very conceptual, strategic approach, identifying the scope that would be required. But the council is and the zone committee and the people of Kaikoura are extremely concerned about the flooding risk to the town from the Kowhai River. And so this was an idea to address the scheme review process that's already taking place on the Kowhai River, and also just improve the current walkways and pedestrian recreational access that is part of the existing as well. So it seemed to make sense as a, I would say, a really important destination point for New Zealanders and for tourists to provide another facility within Kaikoura. So I think that that's very important that we continue with this. The District Council has some money available and it's contributing to the idea of this as well. So yeah, we so for me, supportive of that. In terms of the PT, obviously we've got to, you'll come back to us with that. Commercial development, I like that idea of, and thanks Vicky for, exploring that solar thing. It sounds really interesting, and there might be other opportunities as well. So I think having that in the mix is good. In terms of the CapEx for strategic land purchases, I think that's critically important. And I wonder in terms of framing that, we had talked about and got community support for the idea of a climate levy. And that was thought at the time of the current LTP that those issues would be dealt with across the board, which to some respects they are. But I think that if it was clearly identified in the annual plan, that there was the climate levy was actually being introduced specifically in this case for land purchases associated with river management, and it was attached to the notion of a climate levy. I think that would be good, and I think it's really important that we do start to build a fund for these, because these things are going to come upon us quickly when they do arrive, and that we will be needing to act quickly, and having a fund there would be a good idea too.
Have you got a question about that, or you want to speak again later? Cool. At the end. Cool. Sweet. Ian, and then David, and Greg, and Ian. Yep.
Sorry, David, it's me, mate. Well, I was going to say most of the first three speakers have covered everything, but just in regards the Waimakariri lead, just I take it, similar to Selwyn, that staff-wise and capacity-wise, it's not going to bore and to take too much of your time away from staff, etc.
The way we did the dollars on that slide was the same as the Selwyn trial. So we built a new staff member into our region-wide or out-of-scheme fund for this financial year, which is currently supporting Selwyn. And then we have another staff member added for Selwyn next financial year. So we'd take a similar approach for Waimakariri, where we would do it with an existing labour force. But as it built up over time and the work expanded, we would need to add additional staff.
Just in a sense of general support, the work you got here, Giles, the commercial development, I'm happy with that. But probably similar to Claire, as we know, financially at the moment, people have been hard hit. So we've got 15.5. I'd say that's the top end, and then we're going to see what we can do from that. Kia ora.
Thanks, Ian. David?
Thanks. Last year with the LTP, we started at a point of 34%. Went out to consultation at 22 and finally landed at 17.8, I think it was. Here we are talking about 15.5 this year for an annual plan. In my mind, I think we need to be looking at our longer term focus. We've restructured looking at our core functions, and I think we need to sort of have a hard look at our core functions and what we are proposing, what is nice to have and what's essential. And I think, our constituents are not looking forward to 15.5 after 17.8. We should be looking to get around, in my mind anyway, ideally a single figure increase, but I think people might be happy with 10 to 12. But so look, whilst I'm sort of in favour of looking at some of the things that are up there, I think we need to take that wider approach and look at our core functions, look at what's nice to have, what's essential, and be looking to strike our AP on that sort of basis. I'm not going to talk about ideas that I have today, but I think I could come up with a few things that I consider are either nice to have or not core functions that would bring our rates down to probably 12% tomorrow.
Oh, thanks, David. Greg?
Kia ora, Chair. Yeah, pretty much like Jan has said, most of the things that I think have been said, but I'll just sort of progress through. I meet regularly down on the corner of Colombo and Wordsworth Street. There's a small coffee container there. I find it's an incredibly efficient way to get the vibe of what's happening out there, because it's a mix of both office workers, industrial workers. Progressively, the numbers have got less over the last 2 years, and I am constantly told that the cumulative effect of first 3 years of our LTP are killing people. So I'm really only parroting what I hear constantly, daily. So I'm a great believer in if you build it, they will come. And when that gets into PT, for example, I've really bought into that, the work that's gone on by both Environment Canterbury, but everyone across the Greater Christchurch and etc. But it's a foible now, because at the end of the day, the government haven't committed to it in the way that perhaps we would like them to have. Just going through some of the stuff, again, it's already been talked about, the Waimakariri Targeted River Rate. The Kaikoura Regional Park, some of you might know, I was an ex-staff member here, did a lot of work on that around about 15 years ago. There was a huge appetite at the time, basically because we had this brand new spanking regional biodiversity strategy that everyone just went, this is awesome. And we had a really, really enthusiastic coordinator. I don't know if you'll remember Dr. Wayne. So we had a lot going on. There was also Kaikoura District Council were doing their walking and cycling strategy. There was quite a close arrangement with the likes of Forest and Bird, who were doing a lot of work on the Waimangarara, Department of Conservation out of Mount Fife. So it was one of those perfect storms where everything seemed neat. I'm no longer associated with that, so it's good to hear from Grant that things are still quite keen. But ultimately, though, I think when we went up there and had our visit, we saw that the issues that really worry the people of Kaikoura, although cycling and walking and that outdoor experience, tourism, etc., are critically important for that community. Flooding, weed control, those are the base of the river, those sorts of things. They're the real issues, I believe, that we were given a input from the community and the people that we talked to while we were there, albeit very short. Like anything, the commercial opportunities are great. I mean, it would be, I had the opportunity to go to a farewell at Christchurch City Council a couple of weeks ago, and rub shoulders with the bigwigs up there, and it was kind of nice just to have a very brief discussion, and some of that stuff came in about the opportunities maybe that one would hope could exist between the likes of us and the local TAs. And again, we've had a look at areas. I'm not sure if that's in committee or whatever, so I'm not going to say anything. The other one, part of me likes the idea of building funds for the likes of strategic land purposes or for climate adaptation, whatever it may be. But I think the bottom line is we have such a good balance sheet that we don't necessarily need to. And in fact, one of the mechanisms we seem to have used, which has been relatively successful to date, is when it happens, let's have a look then, because there's also been the government as well have sort of moved in with the activities up in the north, for example, to maybe not have a direct, definite policy, but certainly they have considered where they might be looking to contribute. And I figure that good balance sheet of ours, that let's use that if we need to, but maybe not. And finally, I would just like to say, as usual, thank you to all the staff so far. I know it's early on in the piece for us, but I'm sure you have been diligently working away. I find myself almost confused in that I tend to have some sort of sympathy for the thinking of Councillor East. It's not a criticism of you or the way that I think, but yeah, definitely. People, I would go back to the message I said first of all. There are people struggling out there, and yeah, I think we need to probably consider that very much in our deliberations when we get cracking on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. I'll go to John next, and then Peter, and I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the presentation. I concur with Councillor East and others in talking about 15% being too high. And as Councillor Burns has said, there are real challenges in the wider community with the cost of rates going forward, particularly in some of our lower socioeconomic communities, our aged community and the like. So there are real challenges there, and it's easy to say they can seek some remittance or whatever, but it is creating a challenge. For me, the CapEx strategy, no. I agree, we have a balance sheet, and if it's such a decent deal, then to borrow and with a decent rate of return, then we should be using our balance sheet rather than putting money aside. Just as a side, Mayor Dan wanted to set up a fund equivalent to ACC alike for recovery from civil defence emergencies, and talking to DIA and Treasury, we've got $10 million sitting there. We don't need to set up a fund. We can have it by lunchtime if we need it. So I kind of see our balance sheet, if there are really good commercial opportunities, then we use those opportunities and leverage our bank account and our balance. Just a question around the UAC for Waimakariri, so that would be directly charged back to the ratepayers of Waimakariri, is that correct? And if we establish the Kaikoura Regional Park, that would be a uniform annual charge across all of Canterbury to achieve that.
The way we presented it on the slide was as it's currently budgeted, which is all across Canterbury. I'm reasonably comfortable with that in some respects, but I'm also aware that there are varying views of this. Sorry, I'm sort of comfortable with it, but I'm also aware that there are varying views around uniform annual charges and uniform charges sitting at this table in a philosophical space. So we're going to have that revenue and financing conversation. So in a sense, it's a little bit presumptive, whilst I agree with it, that we, I guess, look to fund it that way, but does this table agree to that in the ultimate space? So those are some challenges for me. Yeah, is it the right time to set up a regional park? I don't know. Thank you.
So just to highlight what Lee said in terms of, we assumed that it will be funded on the current basis, but as Councillor Sunkel has highlighted, we are just about to initiate some small workshops with councillors around the revenue and financing policy that will inform future direction of how things are funded going forward.
Thank you. Peter.
Yeah, look, I'm really keen to see what a business as usual approach would take, given that inflation looks like it'll be 2%, maybe 2.2%. I'm not too sure where CPI sits with that. But I would have thought a starting place might be, well, what does it cost to keep the lights on and be it business as usual? I'm not opposed to Waimakariri or the Kaikoura thing. Commercial opportunities and strategic land purchases, they need to wash their face. We've just had a discussion about strategic land purchase or property purchase that is hurting us. So we need to look seriously about that. Targeted rates for me, and obviously they apply with PT, and they really need to be discussed fully by those people that they impact. And I am reasonably comfortable with the councillors that whose people they impact on making those decisions, or wholly making those decisions, because I think that's fair. I think the envelope is too big. Actually, I struggle with the fact that we're trying to pull rates, we're trying to pull an increase backwards, rather than putting cases forward for an increase above business as usual. And that's the approach that you would take in any other business. It would be, how do we need to get through here? How do we need to get through here? What are the things that we need to do? Rather than saying, oh, these are all the things we need to do. What do we need to cut out? And I think, from my point of view, I think we need to, I'd like to know what business as usual looked like, Giles. I really would. We've talked about that before. PT business as usual is a scary number, actually, on a year-by-year basis. But our other stuff should be easy enough to qualify, I would have thought.
Thanks, Peter. Got a comment, Giles?
Can I just, I think ELT are doing some work on looking at the financial position of the organisation, obviously during the current year. That will also inform the annual plan conversation, as Councillor Scott has indicated. I just wanted to clarify, the reason we've highlighted the commercial opportunities is because absolutely they should wash their face, but it's the exploration of them that has to be done up front to allow us to be more efficient and effective up front. So, for example, the initiative that Councillor Southworth was talking about would, my understanding, would be of benefit to the people of Canterbury and to the wider economy. It may not be directly benefit to the council, but requires some time and effort by staff to investigate. And it's currently a skill set that we don't have in abundance. And it was just recognising that if we want to continue to explore these opportunities, we will need to have the capacity and capability to do that. That was all. And the number we put in, or we've indicated, was a circa, and we also recognise that we may be able to find that by looking at other areas of the organisation that we don't need to do so much on. It was more about a placeholder to stimulate the conversation today.
Thanks, Giles. Nick?
I actually concur with what Peter's just said. Like, what is our cost and what is it? Our business as usual. And I think as Council East, 15.5% in my world is far too high. And I think we do need to cut our cloth. And I mean, I have got some ideas around how we could do that. I don't want to discuss that today, but both our urban and rural communities are hurting at the moment. And, there's not a lot of money out there. And I think it needs to be down around 10 to 12%. We do need to cut our cloth. And the commercial opportunities, I mean, we need to look at our land strategy around the land we do own, and we need to have, if we're going to invest in these, like we discussed earlier today, we need adequate return on our investment. They need to wash their face. And a regional park, I mean, I'm not too sure about that at the moment, given the current climate. Is this a need or a want?
Thanks, Nick. Paul, have you got a comment? You haven't spoken. No worries.
Yeah, thank you.
There you
okay. My thoughts are very much looking at trying to avoid kicking the can down the road and paying more for services later on and getting things done. The most we can get done now that is necessity, rather, than wants. So I'd be anxious to know more and hear more about the needs and what's going to save money in the long run. getting things done now rather than pushing it off to later. So that's what I'm thinking.
And Genevieve, have you got a comment you want to make? And then I'll come back to you, Ian.
I was absorbing a lot of what everyone was saying, but the thing that really triggered me was the Kaikoura Regional Park. I think there's opportunity there that hasn't really been looked at too much, and maybe a strategy looking forward, is either obtaining some sort of regional park land under our own right, or looking at potential sort of right to occupy or consenting space so that we can look at biodiversity outcomes that meet sort of their area needs and wants and desires as well. So it's not just about obtaining land for the community, it's actually looking at the best possible outcome for it, and maybe going through the consenting process to occupy it for a certain amount of time to reach some outcomes. So I'd like to see things like that, strategies for not just ownership or procurement of different things, but everything else, I agree with a lot of other comments around the table, but that's the one that stuck out for me, is I think it could be developed quite.
Thanks, Genevieve. Ian.
Thanks, Craig. I've dealt with the Waimak. In terms of the Kaikoura Regional Park, I'd like to understand where that sits as a priority within the region, because it just seems to me like it's a potential vanity project. It's somebody thinks it's a good idea, so we should all fund it. And I'm not convinced the people of Ashburton and Selwyn are necessarily that keen on funding a regional park in Kaikoura without understanding the relevance of it to the whole of the region. So I think some work needs to be done there. In terms of commercial opportunities, look, I think the regional council's role is to get out of the way of people who want to engage in commercial opportunities, not to subsidise solutions. So to take Vicky's case about solar power, make sure the regional council isn't getting in the way of people who want to develop solar power. We don't have to subsidise it. In terms of the provision for strategic land purchases, your 0.8 was premised on, is that about $1 million a year, is it, in terms of numbers?
Putting into the capital programme 20 million, that was the basis of it, but I perfectly take the feedback around that we have a strong balance sheet. The challenge is obviously the timeline that requires us to come back to council to get formal decisions rather than including.
If it is about $1 million a year, then you're going to spend it faster than you ever build it up. In which case, I'm with Claire. I think we need to clarify our policies around enabling you to use our balance sheet around strategic land purchases. I thought Claire expressed that particularly well. In terms of the overall rate rise, look, I think we should be in single figures. I note that even though our nominal rate rise for the first year of the LTP was 18%, or just under 18%. I think the average rate rise in Ashburton was over 22%, and I think for the Selwyn district it was around 20%. And so in the rural areas, because PT has such a big effect on the overall rate rise, and a lot of the work you did to reduce the budget, it was actually all centred on Christchurch, and it wasn't for the rural areas, and they got hammered. And I'm nervous that at a 15.5% rate rise, there's a whole lot of stuff that'll come back and impact the outside Christchurch again. And yet the main debate seems to be around spending in Christchurch. And I find that unpalatable. And Greg's right. There was a huge reaction against that 23 or 5% rate rise that some of people I know who had to, well, actually I think in our own case we had a 24% rate rise, and that was something like $8,000 extra a year impost on our own business alone. So that, and I've had a lot of feedback about that, and if we're in double figures again, there'll be a revolution, and you'll be driving the end of the regional council. I don't think there's any question about that, and so we've got to be. And there's a whole lot of money we can take out for which are projects which, to quote the Prime Minister, are just vanity projects which aren't our core business. So let's start sharpening our pencil now.
Thanks, Ian. So rather than sum up, because I've got some things I'd like to say about my own view on this, because we haven't really got time. But I think we've heard from every councillor now that's here today, which is good. It's great. We've fitted in. We're over a couple of minutes, but look, I'm actually not that keen to cut anything out at the moment. I want to explore these ideas further. I'm happy that there's been conversations with the Waimakere District Council around the targeted river rate, and that the team feels that they've got enough money in their budget for this year, and I'm assuming the next year, to explore that further. I'd only be happy with that if that's specifically noted in the annual plan for next year, that the actual work we're going to do on that. I think it needs to be a proper annual plan project, even though it might just be using the existing rates that we've got, because I want to see that progressed. And the blueprint idea that Ian mentioned, I really support that too. So if that's part of that annual plan project that uses the budget we've currently got, I'm sort of okay with that. Other than that, I feel like that should go to the Waimakere ratepayers, and they should be asked if they want us to do that or not, like we did with Selwyn. And then on the Kaikoura Regional Park, likewise, I think we should be asking Kaikoura and potentially changing the model for that and saying that might be a targeted rate for Kaikoura as well, with maybe a split on some regional support for that as well, noting that we have to build the case about how that is regionally significant. But I'm pretty interested in that. And that's why I'm really saying let's build the cases for them, and if they don't stack up, then don't put them in. But let's build the case. And likewise, the commercial opportunity strategic land purchase, just really the detail for me is what we need next. And my answer to the second question up there is I would be comfortable with that. I would, if it fits in, because I feel like we got that agreed through the LTP last time. It's in there. People know that that's potentially coming. Always open to savings, of course, like we did in the LTP this year. If we can look for savings, we'll always do that. So let's build that in to the process as well. And I do agree with Vicky that it would always be good to know, have some ideas about what the dollar terms are in terms of these rate rises, because, for a Christchurch home, and then we have averages in our rural properties as well. Let's know what that is, because I think it helps us understand that a whole lot better. Thanks for the work. I note that we've got the PT stuff next week, and there's a whole program of work to go on, and there's a long way to go on this. So good feedback, though. You've heard the feedback. There's appetite in the room for the rates to be really looked at and scrutinised. The core functions, business as usual sort of approach. So that's good feedback for people, but build the cases around those additional things and see where they fall as we go through the process. Thank you. And I know we've got our next briefing now too, on what is it? Someone remind me. CWMS. So thanks, Cam. So thanks, Giles and Lee and team. And we welcome Cam and Martin. So welcome, Cam and Martin. We're looking at the CWMS Zone Committee Review Update, and welcome along. I'll hand over to you. And I know we've got half an hour. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm hoping we'll get through this in less than half an hour. But good afternoon, councillors. So the purpose of this briefing is to provide a quick update on the CWMS Zone Committee review following a workshop that we had last month with you, and give you a bit of an update on some of the work we've been doing since, and also the next steps. Now, I'll move through. So as you'll remember, on the 12th of September, we held a councillor workshop with you all. And this was testing a number of things. First of all, we tested, we're thinking about local leadership into the future and what happens next with the zone committees. We first tested what are some of the principles, functions and bottom lines that should inform this work. Now, the workshop with you was extremely useful from a staff perspective, both the feedback that we got on some of these underlying principles, but also the models that we'll talk to next. And so we heard that there was broad agreement with the principals and lots of discussion that collaboration and partnership with mana whenua is critical. And there was also thoughts around kind of how we promote localism, provide some flexibility and transparency and accountability into the principles that should underscore this work as well. With regards to functions, I think there's some really good discussion around, again, how we kind of build off the zone committee work and the collaboration that they play within the community, hearing kind of community issues and helping with responses to those. But also a note that there's no silver bullet here, and there are a number of the functions that we want to be delivered out there at place within the community need to be delivered by a different sets of groups. And then we also had what we referred to as bottom lines, and those were relating to kind of the need for some form of regional consistency, kind of alignment with CWMS targets and goals, council support and buy-in being needed, and there was large agreement to that as well. So that was useful. Then you might remember we talked about 4 models that we tested with you as a group. And these ranged from something that looks similar to zone committees, kind of a joint committee structure that might be updated to kind of inform, like it'd be closer aligned to freshwater management units, through to less formal structures that include TA, Territorial Authority representative, Regional Council representative, and mana whenua representative, through to Model 4, which is just relying on catchment groups. What we heard from you on the 12th of September was that there was a bit of a mix, but it was largely focused around how we work with mana whenua and territorial authorities in particular, but then also noting that what's the role of those groups in supporting some of those established groups we already have out there, such as catchment groups are the obvious one. But obviously that formal collaboration remains crucial with those 3 groups. There was a lot of talk about efficiency and effectiveness, making sure that we are really considering kind of the cost of these, but also making sure that they've got clear outcomes, a clear purpose, and that we kind of track progress towards those. What we also heard and were questioned on at that 12th of September workshop were 2 bits of information, and I remember Claire Mackay was asking one, and I think the other came from Chair Pooling. And one was around what are the existing partnership programs we have in place across Canterbury, and because there are a number, and they all look the same in some ways, but they all are a bit different as well. And so we've been doing some work. We're not presenting it here today, but we just wanted to give you some of kind of our key observations so far, is that there are a mix of site-specific programs, and we think about Whakaora, which is over in Whakaropo, Littleton Harbour, which is a partnership between ourselves, Ngāti Wheki, Christchurch City Council, and the Port Company, which is a little bit different from others, given that we do have someone like the Port Company involved, but we also have partnership programs down in Mackenzie, Mokahi, and also around Waihora, and there are a number of others. They typically aim to collaboratively restore and improve environmental and cultural outcomes. There is the similar kind of vein that runs through to them, and they do seek kind of a commitment from a number of agencies and communities. Some are more community facing than others, and I think Whakaora is a really good example of that. And they do range from co-governance to operational and community involvement. From a funding perspective, there's different kind of approaches to funding these. Some are, most of are funded obviously through a long-term plan, but some also receive government funding. Some receive funding from those key partners as well, and all of them involve some form of in-kind contributions. Most of those work programs are delivered on tangible results and on-the-ground work items, essentially. So a lot of biosecurity efforts, biodiversity efforts, etc., planting efforts, and they often leverage further funding within those. The second request that we had was what is happening elsewhere across the country. And so we've had conversations with 5 other regional councils to actually understand how is it they engage locally at place with with communities, but where do mana whenua sit within that, and where do territorial authorities sit within that. And we talked to Waikato, Hawke's Bay, Otago, Greater Wellington and Southland, and we've got a whole bunch of information, and we've just captured a few key points here. But essentially, there's no consistent arrangements for local engagement, and they do have similar challenges to us. We've talked about, as part of the Zone Committee review, that moving from quite a planning heavy workload for our zone committees into the implementation stage was quite a big shift, and it wasn't necessarily kind of well supported, I guess. We find that elsewhere in the country as well, as the feedback that we've had from staff at other councils, is that the implementation is, a lot of this engagement is focused at that planning level and technical reference groups, etc. But there are obviously governance arrangements in place for a number of these councils as well. So most councils have or have had dedicated structures for local engagement. Often they're temporary to reflect the work at hand rather than a kind of a prolonged group that's set in stone. And they're quite often at different stages, but sustaining local groups is commonly challenging. As I've talked, generally shifting from planning to implementation has been a challenge shared across councils, in which we've experienced here. An interesting point here, there is a tendency towards integrated catchment management beyond freshwater. And so obviously the CWMS is a water management strategy, but it does go wider than just water. But I think this was particularly to some of the points that Chair Paulings made previously around what should the scope of this be, and how do we kind of wrap in wider issues that we touch on or we're responsible for alongside freshwater. Reporting and evaluations is often challenging too. And lastly, there are varied relationships with catchment groups. Much as we are engaging with catchment groups, but not formally integrated or in a coordinated sense. So there's been lots of good information that we've garnered through those conversations that we'll be using to inform this work as it shapes up. However, a lot of it wasn't too surprising. And just finally, and I'm wrapping through this really quickly, but we can open for questions shortly. Where are we going to next? So you'll remember last time we spoke, we talked about the Mayoral Forum making a decision that 4 mayors would be nominated to join a small kind of working group to help shape up options. And so that's mayors Black, Bowen, Mackle and Major. And then you'll remember also at Toroputoia on that same day, there was agreement that 4 mana whenua reps would be identified. And so those were Gabrielle Huria from Te Kura Takapini, Urik Tainui from Onuku, and Dardanelle McLean-Smith from Waihao. There has been a little bit of shift with these, just given availability of diaries. Gabrielle's unlikely to attend the first workshop, and Liz Brown's confirmed that she is happy with Councillor Karako or Cranwell attending, and I think Councillor Karako is going to attend the first workshop. Mayor Bowen can't attend the first workshop, so we have Mayor Munro from Mackenzie, which is great just to ensure we have ongoing southern representation from a territorial authority perspective. So we're workshops 21st of October, this coming Monday, and then on the 4th of November. And the intention is for the 21st of October is to run through exactly the same workshop that we did with this council to understand where they as a group might sit or the different perspectives. And then from that we'll shape our workshop for the 4th of November. We're also updating Zone Committee chairs and deputies on the 30th of October, and we've been having discussions with staff and territorial authorities, and that's been ongoing. I know we're talking to Ashburton later today and Hurunui tomorrow. And then, of course, we're on track for reporting to the Canterbury Mayoral Forum on the 29th of November. And the nature and the shape of that paper will be informed, obviously, by the 2 workshops that we've got planned. We're hoping that we'll get guidance or endorsement from that mayoral forum meeting around zone committees in particular. Is that still an approach that they endorse, or they, and if not, what are the one or two models that they'd actually like further advice on in the new year? And so then we can work that up with an intention to have it all closed off with new structures in place by midway through next year and start for the next financial year. But that's something we need to kind of ongoingly test with the mayoral forum and with you as a council as well. So that is all I have, but I'll open up to any questions.
Thanks, Cam. Yeah, look, just a note, we had been ongoing discussions around this, trying to get all the mayors and Runanga reps in the same place, and yeah, luckily we've got the majority there next Monday, and you'll note there's another one on November the 4th. I just had a question, Cam, around have we, and look, I know it's been sort of moving pretty fast trying to get to that mayoral forum on the 29th of November, but have we got an intention to come back to this council before that paper goes to the mayoral forum? Is there any chance to do that, just so this council understands where we've landed post those workshops? Is that able to be put in there?
Yes, there's nothing booked in, but we'll certainly look to do that. We were hoping actually to have already had the first workshop by now, and we penciled this in to actually report back on that first workshop, but just landing times with mayors and Runanga reps and some of yourselves has been challenging. So yes.
I just think that would be a good idea, so that we're well informed to go into that 29th meeting, particularly if I have to carry that message from this council. That'd be really important, so that'd be great. I'll open it up for any questions that people have, although is it pretty self-explanatory, I think, for everybody. That's the process we're in. We've had our workshop. The feedback from that's encapsulated here. We run this with the group of mayors and Runanga representatives, and then, like I said, come back to this council and then on to the mayoral forum. And I think what Cam said, and I've got you down to have a chat. We've got the idea that, assuming that there'll be a sort of agreement to explore maybe one or two preferred models into the early part of next year. That's sort of the idea that we're looking at. So important to take that into account. Yayan and then Grant.
Kia ora, Cam. Kia ora kōrua. Thanks for for your presentation today and updating. I remember yesterday that Liz Brown asked about what other models. So I'm this kind of paper thing is gone to the Runanga and the mayors as well for next Monday.
Yes, we'll be providing them with the same material that informed the workshop with you, and we're also providing the group ahead of Monday a bit of an update on all the engagement we've had to date with regard to what were the key themes we heard from individual interviews with mayors, what did we hear from zone committee workshops, etc. So there'll be a bit of a briefing pack going out today.
Yeah, and for me, this paper was probably the number 3, just on other regional councils arrangements, and probably that second bullet point, tendency towards integrated catchment management. Can you give me an example?
Yeah, happy to jump in there. So we see this on a group level. So some councils have, the integrated catchment groups. I don't know, for example, Otago Regional Council has just started theirs. I think they have 2 up and running, started last year. But we also see this reflected in organisational structures. I know some regional councils have gone, are currently, or will go through restructuring processes to see how some of the stronger RMA planning and strategy functions can be better integrated with, call it operations or delivery. So we've seen this at least 3 or 4 regional councils. So happy to provide you more detailed examples of individual groups and councils, if you like.
I think that'd be key as part of that sort of analysis stuff as we lead into the final report and even into next year. Like that sort of stuff, just alluding to those is going to be important, I think, to give a bit of evidence to what you're seeing. So, Grant, and then Claire by the looks of it.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. This is good summary of what we've discussed before. Just one thing that I picked up on the meeting that we had on the 12th was under the key principles, the idea of strategic management. And it's really what James has picked up, and that the words beside that were integrated and holistic as a catchment approach. And kind of related to that, you comment about the Canterbury water management strategy is a freshwater thing, but it's very much, the input of that document and the zone committee stuff went in to help shape the land and water regional plan. So the land part of it is where the whole of catchment integrated approach really comes into it, because whatever you do on the land affects what happens with the water. So I think it's good. In terms, the other comment I had was the issue of what other councils are doing. Sorry, get the right page. And one of the bullets was supporting delivery and implementation, and I think that's really key to you can do all the planning and stuff and the zone commit, but it is the effectiveness of delivery and implementation, and that we're funding that. We have the right people in place to design and manage projects and see the output delivered on time. Thanks.
Claire?
Yeah, thanks very much. Look, it's a fair review of the feedback, so thanks for that, Cam and Martin. I would just caution my fellow councillors around thinking around this, and I know we're not going to be the primary decision maker, but we're certainly going to have a substantial view, is that we've got a whole lot of stuff that's actually happening on the ground now. We've got catchment groups that are sprouting out of nowhere all by themselves, and if we come in and aren't perceptive about what we want to do, we could blow this all apart and undo a whole lot of good work that's actually been done. So I just hope that we understand that and thinking about where we're going to go for the future here. And I understand all around the regulatory processes, but if we start making this very complicated in an integrated plan, when we've got farm environment plans covering all our farming activities, either as Schedule 7 or 7A, I think that I'm just putting a word of caution out there that this could come back to bite you.
Thanks, Claire. Ian, and then David.
I think that was a good segue into what I was going to say. In the last Ashburton Zone Committee, the Mayor of Ashburton made some really strong comments about the failure of the system, because regardless of what the Zone Committee or Ashburton as a community asked for, they were getting ignored by Tuam Street. And so it'll be, if you haven't heard his comments, it'll be worth going back over the minutes of that.
Sorry, David.
Thanks. I just look at some of the screens that have been put up today, and we talk about collaboration and partnership. We talk about integrated catchment management, and these are terms that I think need to be clearly elucidated as to what do they actually mean. And I think back to this morning when we were talking about government action on various bits of legislation where they're trying to interpret what does have regard to, what does give effect to, what does take account of actually mean. And so I think we need to be, like Ian's saying, some clear direction. The Mayor of Ashburton was asking that sort of question, but in developing this new strategy, I think we really need to be very clear in what some of the terminology we are introducing into this document actually means. I think, finally, we as elected members have the ability to make the final decision, and does that final decision sort of have some misinterpretation as to the rights, authorities, and expectations of some of our wider community. And for me, I think that's quite important.
Thanks, David. I think that's everyone who wanted to speak. Thanks, Cam and Martin. Yeah, like it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because the Mayoral Forum, the COMS sits underneath their purview, so they will make a decision. But obviously, each partner to that, including us, the TLAs, and even the Papatipi Runanga, will make their own decisions ultimately as well about the participation. That's why I think it's really important to be together and try to work out a solution that we all can try and agree on. And that's what we'll be trying to do over the next while, firstly till November and then into next year, so that we can get whatever model is agreed on up and running. So yeah, like that's the challenge in front of all of us. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to the discussions, and I am glad to see that there is some other regional councils looking at that sort of integrated catchment thing. Even though I take David's point, it's hard to know what that always means. But I just think it's about those multiple values that are looked at, and we already do that through the CWMS anyway, because of the priorities and the things that are listed in there anyway. So yeah, looking forward to the challenge, and I know that it's great to have when I went to the Mayoral Forum last time alongside Peter and Stephanie, the mayors that were selected were really excited to get involved in the discussion, and from the the little engagement we had with the Runanga yesterday, looking like it's going to be a good series of workshops. So bring it on. Kia ora. Oh, Vicky, late comment.
Well, a question, really, and this is something I was thinking about with the work programme yesterday and delivery, but the CWMS as a document, that's still staying within our framework for the time to come. Like we're looking at the zone committees, and how they get framed up. The CWMS is still sitting with us, and assuming that's the case, that's my understanding. Just thinking about the targets report. So the one we've got online is like 2021. It's supposed to have been. I think the actual CWMS itself said those should be reported every year. We shifted to being reporting every 2 years. We've got we had targets set up for 2025. So I'm just a bit concerned if the CWMS, because I know this conversation was there was a degree of early days conversation around actually does the CWMS even still stay within the mix? And I think it still is. But if it is, then we absolutely should be looking at the targets that were set in that and holding ourselves to those and reporting on them publicly and making sure we're really clear about what it's actually delivering, because these are set up. The zone committee was set up, and whatever we're reframing to do is to deliver on those targets. And I know it fits into the planning framework and stuff as well, and that's got changes to come over time. But that's, we're looking at integrated plan being actually a thing on the ground about 2030 or something, I think. So we need to be thinking pretty closely about that.
Yeah, good point, Vicky. I think on the targets report, and I think there's no suggestion at the moment the COMS is gone or anything. It's still there. This is the mechanism underneath that that we're trying to explore, and that's just taking probably people's focus at the moment. But a really good point that we probably need to reflect on is, what are we doing about targets, and are we going to report on them, and how's that going to go forward as well, and who does that, etc. So that might be part of the mix to think about in November as a mention, and then maybe as part of that final stuff into early next year. So good point. Thank you.
It also plays into what I kept raised yesterday around a sort of having a baseline, knowing where we're at when if we're starting a new sort of style of doing the community and this framework, we should know where we're at and know how it's delivering and is it making a difference and so on. So
thank you. Last say, Cam.
I can quickly. I want to respond to that one in particular. We are intending for the targets report next year. We're just doing a bit of work. Obviously, you as a council landed an LTP with an impact framework that's got some measures in there. We're looking at what are the best. Thinking about those targets. How can we kind of report on those that tell that story to the community about where we are at? So you can expect further advice on that.
Great, awesome, well done. Good luck with, I'll see you on Monday. good luck with the work in the interim and getting the pack out today to all the participants. And it's lunchtime, everybody. I think we're back at 1:15 for us councillors. We've got a public excluded briefing, and then back in public at 2:15. Thank you.